Hello, today we're going to be talking about stat builds, what they are, go over a few of them, kind of explain what training is, what to look for, that sort of thing. So before we get into it, I do want to talk about what a stat build is, and a stat build is just basically a game plan for how you want to build your combat stats. There's very different opinions, approaches, and outlooks on it, and just generally whatever ratios you come up with for your stats is what your stat build is. So you can see right here, defense is a very large portion of my stats here at 39.93%. If we just kind of look at all of them, we can see 28, 39, 28, 3. So that's what a stat build is. It's your ratio. There's different reasons to consider them and think about them and those sorts of things. So that's what we're talking about today. Now, before I get into it, let me just go back there, and we are here now. So we need to look at what the basics of stat training are, and the best place to start is at the gym with your gym score. So if we go to the gym and we look at a gym, we can see these pips there, and like we see, this has 2 full bars, so this is a gym score of 2 full bars, gym score 2. We go into frontline fitness. We see these aren't available for this gym, but I believe this is like what is this, a 7.4, I think, about a 7.4. So that's the gym score for this gym. These gym scores are just multipliers to the stats you'd gain for doing it. If we look, George's is about a 6.2, I believe this is a 7.2, 6.2, something like that. Oh yeah, it's 7.2. This is 7.5. That's what it is. So what this is it's a straight multiplier to the amount of stats you gain. So if you were to get 100 right here, and then we look at something like right here it's 4 points, so it's double the gym score. So if we got 100 stats training here, then for the same energy we'd get 200 stats training here because the gym score increases that much. Because of that, getting gym score up quickly is very, very useful. And there is a company that does this. I talk about it in my company's video. It's the music store. It lets you, whenever you spend energy in the gym, you get experience to unlock the next gym, and that gym experience is boosted from the music store. So that's one option to consider if you're wanting to build up your stats quickly, is just move to a music store, start unlocking some of these gyms so you get these gym scores up more quickly. Now, the very interesting thing about this is you go linearly through these gyms when you're getting your gym experience. So you'll start right here, and you'll move forward from the light weights to the middle weights to the heavy weights. But once you hit cha-chas, you unlock a couple of different gyms here, which is gyms that have 2 stats they train for more than the best heavyweight, but you have to stay within a certain ratio of stats. So you get better gym gains, but you have to be training those stats more than the gym's stats that they don't have. And this is also true of once you reach George's, the final heavyweight, you do this for single stats. We can see it's all the way up at 8, but it only trains 1. So this has to stay at a certain ratio above everything else. And Baldr is, from the beginner's guide, he also kind of broke this stuff down years and years ago, and kind of looks at them for different reasons, and we'll get into that in a minute. But as far as gym training goes, we have two other things to talk about before we even think about what our stat build is going to be, and that's hitting the caps. While the numbers go up forever, there are some conventional caps that people talk about, and the first cap is the happy cap. And what this refers to is when forms of happy jumping are no longer worth doing, and it's better to just use Xanax for energy to train than to try to optimize your happy to increase your gym gains. So when you start the game, happiness is going to be a massive influence and factor into how much stats you gain whenever you train in the gym. So renting a PI, private island, and hiring all the staff and getting that maximum happy as high as possible is very, very important for the gym gains you get, because happiness is a big influence at the start. From there, there's the logic of happy jumping, which is when you take candies or e-DVDs or maybe use the poison mistletoe, just some method you use to get happiness up, multiply it with an ecstasy, and then train in the gym after that. And those happy jumps have varying costs, varying effectiveness, and generally there's a cap where it's just more important to spend energy than to worry about your happiness being beyond the 5,000 from a private island. So those are what the happy caps are, and generally they are between 250k to 450k within a single stat. But it depends on what kind of happy jump training you're doing, what your budgeting is for it, because it's always going to provide a little more, and then also like what your end goal is and what kind of companies you're in and all those sort of extra factors. Generally, I've seen people go up as high as 1 mil in each stat with their happy jumps, and that's certainly viable, I think. But I would recommend 450k in a stat is when you're probably done. It's no longer cost effective for you in most situations to continue to happy jump. Instead, your goal is to just spend as much energy in the gym as possible. And to that end there's a cap to that as well. It's known as the soft cap, and this is kind of faded over the past couple of years, but it's still a very important factor in Torn. The soft cap is 50 million in each stat. At that point, where you're seeing your stats currently go up exponentially, each time you train, you're getting more and more stats. At 50 mil, that slows down significantly. It goes down from where it is to about 1%, and someone at 50 mil stats is going to be getting roughly the same amount of stats when they train in the gym as someone with 250 mil. It'll be slightly different, but not significantly. And because of that, 50 mil is considered the soft cap. So when we're thinking about our stat builds, we're typically talking about being especially past our happy cap, especially past our gym score, and probably past our soft caps. I would personally recommend you get all your stats to the soft cap of 50 mil each, but you don't have to. The biggest factor is going to be the gym score. If you're unlocking those specialty gyms, it's not urgent. So now that we know about our stat builds, let's start talking about the different, stat builds now that we've established the things we need to look at before we build our stats in a certain ratio. So the first and most obvious is having balanced stats. We talked about these specialty gyms. If we look, and these are 7.5 and George is 7.2, why would we need a gym that's just slightly better? This results in about 2% more gym gains than George's. And the math for that is really simple. It's just the 7.5 over 7.2, and that's the gym gains we get for being in that special. It's 4%. So um, it's not very significant, and it forces us to be in a certain ratio, and we need to have those two stats to their totals be higher than the abandoned stats. And so the two gems are one with strength and speed and another with defense and dexterity. And I would always recommend, if you're going to be unlocking this gem, to do the frontline fitness gem, because the strength and speed are always important in a fight. You can get in a fight and be able to stall with like a cattle prod or something with just strength and speed. Your defensive stats are the stronger stats that are going to determine how effective you are. But if you don't have either strength or speed, you're going to be opening up yourself to anyone who's training the corresponding stat. So if you don't have your strength, then anyone with any amount of defense is just going to mitigate your attacks, and it doesn't matter if you have speed. If you don't have speed, anyone with any amount of dexterity is going to be able to dodge all of your hits, and it doesn't matter that you have really high strength. So you need at least to train these two, in my opinion. And we'll talk about that more in a moment. But for balanced, because there is those dependencies, the idea is to not worry about this minor 4% boost, and instead just stick with George's and just train all your stats relatively evenly. Factions have to alternate which gems have steadfast, which is a gem gain multiplier. If we go back to the gem here, I'll just open it up in a new tab here. We can see the steadfast is 15% here, but if we go into George's, we see that it's 10% here, 10% here. The reason for this is if we go into our faction, we can see our upgrades in steadfast, and we can see that each stat can get up to 10%, but then one of these two, either strength or speed, only one of them can go up to 15. And then same is true for defense and dexterity, only one of them can go up to 15. And then when they're at 15, only one of the two selected stats can go beyond that. So that's the reason that factions tend to alternate stats, is because they're forced to pick. So you want to know your faction's training schedule and training program, which stats they prioritize if they do, and you want to train in conjunction with how their steadfast is operating. And because of that, if you have a balanced build, if you're not worried about getting these specialty gems, then you can just train with the steadfast, not worry about it, keep them close by. The benefits of being balanced is anyone with similar stats to you, you're going to destroy them because you have an answer to anything they are lacking. So if they are lacking dexterity, then you can take advantage of that because you're going to be landing all of your hits. But they may not land all of their hits because you have your dexterity. And because of that, balanced is really, really good when you're comparing yourself to other people of similar stats. Now the downside is you are not getting these gem boosts. You're not optimizing how much gem gains you get with these specialty gems. And where this 4% may not seem like much, if someone's getting 4% over a year or 2 years, that starts to add up a lot. So, I mean, if you're at 1 mil and they're at 1 mil 40,000, you're not going to notice that, but in 2 or 3 years' time, you're going to start to notice their stats are building faster than yours. Not only that, they're not training as many stats, so they're putting more into those other stats more quickly. They're hitting those soft caps faster, and their stats are going to multiply more quickly. So balanced is perfectly fine, it just trains slower. So then we can look at some other options here. Hanks ratio is the next one I want to talk about here. What this is this is essentially what I'm running, not truly, but The idea here is that you have one stat that is relatively abandoned. In this example, we have this person's, and this is by Baldr, by the way. We have this person having their defense be 9% of their total stats, while their defense is 34%. And this is roughly what I'm doing. You can see that what that does is it still gives you this frontline fitness where you're getting 4% for strength and speed, but you can also unlock one of the single stats for even larger increase for that. So here we have the defense gains for the defense gym that I'm using. And when we look here, we see this has a gym score of 8. So it's significantly more than the 7.2 we see in George's. It's more than 10% more gym gains. So I'm able to get 10% gym gains on this main stat, plus I'm able to get 4% on the other two stats. And with Hank's logic with this is you're optimizing how many gyms are getting boosts. And so you're getting stats much faster than any other kind of stat build. The problem is you open yourself to a vulnerability because you are missing a stat. So in the example, and for me as well, I'm lacking dexterity. And so I can play that as an advantage in some cases where I don't have to worry about the dexterity, so I can take dexterity penalties. But in return, it does make me vulnerable in this way where people are going to consistently hit more. And in the case of defense, that means I can be hit and then get debuffed and all my stats start falling apart from there. It's not that dexterity is particularly better than defense. I would argue it's slightly better just because it gets a bunch of silent buffs. But it does have its own vulnerabilities and weaknesses as well. We'll talk about that in another video. We'll talk about kind of the pros and cons of different defense versus dexterity. But just to summarize, the whole point of Hank's is to lower one of these two, either defense or dexterity, take advantage of frontline fitness for gains, and then whichever stat is your main stat is going to have the single stat gem for the 8 gem score. Really useful. The next is Baldr's ratio, which we can see in this sheet as well. And in this example, he shows that his offensive stats, he's going to have one that is at 30%, one that is just under 25%, and then he's going to keep his 2 defensive stats at 22%. If I were to recommend a single stat build for everyone, that is exactly the stat build I would recommend, because it doesn't abandon anything, and we'll talk about what that is in a moment. But what that ends up doing is these single stat gems are not just for defense or dexterity, they also can have a strength or speed one. So what you end up doing is you end up having 7.5 for one of the stats and then the 8 for the other stat. And then when you're not training these, you're just using George's for your defensive stats. And that keeps you relatively balanced, but you're pumping up a single stat very, very quickly, and that's beneficial because you can go past the soft cap and start getting into the point where you can consider using stat enhancers for that stat and kind of counter all the people that are doing Hanks, which is much more popular. So it's a very good build. Also, of course, with the, I mentioned before, the cattle prod. If you have a cattle prod, it stuns whenever you hit anybody with melee. And so you just need strength and speed for that. There's a couple of builds that can kind of stall. And so as long as you have life, you can have defensive setups, even with just strength and speed. So it's very good in my opinion. The problem with it is you're not getting stat gains as significant as Hank's, yet you're still keeping some of your stats relatively low. While it may not seem like they're much lower, ultimately they end up being about a 50% difference between your low stat and your high stat, and that can create vulnerabilities, especially because you're not playing very defensively. So anyone around your stats is going to punish you very, very easily. A balanced person or someone on Hanks near the same stats is going to be able to take advantage of that. But in return, your offensive abilities are much better. Your stat gains are still good. They're better than balanced, not as good as Hanks. It's a good medium ground, I think. So let's go into the other stat builds. Abandoned is essentially what I'm doing. Abandoned is when you have a stat that, in order to keep the specialty ratios, rather than trying to stay close on the ratios like Baldr outlines here, like trying to keep this 34% and this 9%, instead you just abandon a stat. And by doing this, you are even more vulnerable to the failed stats, and you can do it with Hanks by abandoning just the stat you're not training. And personally, if I were to redo my training, I would do Baldr's for speed than strength, and if I couldn't do Baldr's, then I would actually do Hanks for dexterity, and then I would abandon defense at 50 million. But the reason abandoning is good is because you stop wasting any energy on that abandoned stat. It's not going to be building at the same rate, so players can take advantage of that weakness anyway. So if you just open the door on that, dump all that energy into the stats that are going to build up faster, your total stats is going to build up even more quickly. And then, especially with defense and dexterity, there's the strip club company types that will let you get 10% gem gains later on. So you can kind of build up these stats, get to the point where you can use an SE for your main stat, and then when you're at that point, you'll be much more established in the game. You can join a strip club and then train the stat you had abandoned. And so that's my plan right now. I'm getting close to the point where I should be just doing SEs instead of energy drinks. And once I do that, I will probably be jumping to a strip club and then training dexterity that way, since I can just use boxing gloves to train my defense. So abandoning a stat can be really valuable for that. For Baldr's, if you look at Baldr's ratio, you can actually abandon both dexterity and defense. So you're pumping all your energy into 2 stats, and that will get you really strong really quick. If you do this for strength and speed, and personally I'd recommend speed over strength, but either one's good because they both stay up, and if you abandon both defense and dexterity, then you can get to the point where you can actually hit the really big players rather quickly. You can get to the point where you're able to contribute into fights and do damage and group attacks and things really, really quickly. The problem is you're so vulnerable to hits that if you're not stalling, then you're just going to die instantly whenever anyone attacks you. I know some people that really frustrates, but I also know people that don't really care about that because they can get their hits in. It is something to be aware of, but abandoning on Baldr's is a very, very aggressive build, I think. So the final one, I'm sure this has been what you've been looking at the whole time, is whoring. What is whoring? Whoring is when you just train one stat. This is what a lot of people will advocate, is you want to whore your main stat, and then essentially that means you abandon everything else. So if I were to whore, I would just train my defense. And then if I couldn't train my defense because of steadfast or something, then I might go to frontline, maybe. I might still just train defense. The point of this is because the stat caps are soft and you do still build up stats, you may as well just get one stat that's so insanely high no one can do, like, their counters stop mattering because they can't break that stat. If I had a trillion defense, then it doesn't matter if I have 0 dexterity, because most players are not going to be able to do any damage at all. So all their hits are mitigated. It doesn't affect me at all. So that's the logic between whoring a stat. Not only that, it gets you to the point where you can use stat enhancers cost effectively very, very quickly. It also builds your total stats much more quickly because you're dumping all your energy into only one stat. So if you whore a stat, you can get to the billions rather quickly, like a few months. It's not insane to consider SEing after 2 years if you whore a stat. The problem is there's always someone stronger than you, and there's always someone that can hit you. So even if you're annoying to deal with people of the same stats as you, it's not crazy to expect someone slightly stronger to be able to punch through you. Right now I'm sitting at 9 billion. If someone just had 9 billion dexterity, all I would need is a melatonin and to wait out their tyrosine for me to be able to hit them. Now granted, they're going to have a loadout that is going to complement their dexterity most likely, but that's not always the case. But even if it is, there's still solutions to be had, and someone slightly stronger than me, I'm by no means strong in this game. Someone stronger than me can handle you rather quickly. Also, if you've just hoard like defense or dexterity, then a player that has just a few mil in each stat can assist on you and cut those horde stats in half rather quickly. And since you wouldn't have the stats to fight them off, you would be vulnerable to those group attacks. So it's a very extreme method, and it can get you stuck in a lot of ways, so I would never recommend it. But it is something some people do. Partial abandonment, like I've abandoned dexterity at this point. I don't train it at all. Partial abandonment is fine, but I would never endorse whoring a stat unless you're at the point where you've already hit like your stat caps and everything, which is why it's important for us to have known these words. Is you can see how everything kind of interrelates as we continue to discuss it. So now that we've talked about the different stat builds, we've talked about the basics of stat training, the question becomes, what's the best? Personally, I think there are right and wrong answers for this. A lot of people would say it's very subjective. I would say what is best is either traditional Baldrs for speed strength, traditional Baldrs for strength speed, or abandoning a stat on one of Hank's builds, either dexterity or defense. I put dexterity above defense. And the reason I think those are best is because it finds a balance between getting total stats up and being able to participate in fights quickly. So I think both of those things are very beneficial to players that are starting out. They're also very easy to adapt and jump out of if you don't like them. So I think those are very good choices. I would not recommend being balanced, and I would not recommend being horde. But you can. There's good reasons, especially for balance. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. I think whoring is the worst thing you can do. But I do see benefits in abandoning some stats. I do see benefits in being balanced. But generally, how Hank and Baldr's ratios work tends to be best. You don't need to stay like within the exact numbers. It does help with the gem gains, because if you train out a ratio, you actually lose access to the gem until you train back into ratio with George's. So not staying specifically in those ratios but close to them is beneficial. If you actually look for, like if I go to my gyms, we can see I have the specialist gyms, and it actually tells me how much I'm allowed to train in each stat before I risk losing one of the 2 gyms I've selected. And this is Torn Tools. So if I wanted to do something like a speed strength Baldr's, I can just pick speed as my single stat, strength speed as my double stat, and this would be Baldrs for speed, and I can see I can train as much speed as I want. I still can train up my dexterity and strength some, but my defense is way out of ratio, so I still need to get 2 billion speed before I can actually access the speed gym. And that is possible. Even though I've been playing for years, I could jump into this if I really wanted. The problem is at my point, I need to be thinking more about stat enhancers than changing my build, but it is possible to do this. So I do recommend having torn tools for this. I recommend being conscious of the ratios, and I will link this guide and I will link the torn tools in the description. But yeah, I think that's the best information I can give. So I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. I know this was a bit of a longer video, but this is something people have a lot of questions about. This is probably the single most common question I get, and not only is it the most common question, it's the hardest to explain, and it always takes a long time, and I never feel like I've got people to understand what I'm trying to say, because they'll say, oh, I want to train my dexterity, and I'll say, oh, you should probably do Hank's Dex then. And then I have to explain what that means, how they need to be training their stats. If you have an idea of what all this is, when you start worrying about those things, which it means you're getting close to your soft caps of 50 million, then you're already conscious of where you want to go. You can kind of get a feel for what each of the 4 stats do and how many weapons and perks and debuffs are associated for each thing. So you can have a better idea of what your approach will be. But that said, I hope this was edifying. I hope it made sense. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one. Just make sure if you have any questions, please comment and let me know. And I will see you next time.